Ben Harper's peaceful field was overtaken by a bright red SUV, a blatant violation of his property that no rules seemed to stop. Behind the wheel was Karen Wilkinson, the overbearing HOA president whose arrogance knew no bounds. But when Ben quietly locked the gate, he turned the tables in a clever and unexpected way, leaving Karen trapped by her own hubris. And just wait to see how this seemingly ordinary man restored justice, proving that courage and ingenuity can triumph, even against the most confident bully. Benjamin Ben Harper wiped the sweat from his brow as he leaned on the handle of his rake, surveying the neat rows of freshly cut grass on his small plot just outside the city limits. It had been a long, exhausting day, sun beating down relentlessly, the occasional stubborn weed fighting for its life, but there was a certain satisfaction in seeing his land tidy and well kept. This field wasn't just a patch of earth to him, it was a place of pride, a sanctuary where he could escape the noise and stress of the city and connect with something real, something he had nurtured with his own hands. As he straightened up, taking in the golden glow of the late afternoon sun, something entirely out of place caught his eye. A bright red SUV gleamed in the middle of his freshly mowed field, its polished surface reflecting the sun like a warning light. Ben froze mid-step, heart thudding, disbelief anchoring him in place. The vehicle sat there as if it had always belonged, defiant in its intrusion. Behind the wheel sat Karen Wilkinson, the HOA president, the woman whose reputation in the neighborhood was as sharp and rigid as the edge of a freshly trimmed hedge. She was infamous for her obsession with rules, her meticulous enforcement of every guideline, from the angle of garden gnomes to the exact shade of mailbox paint. She had built herself a reputation as someone who would call meetings, issue fines, and lecture anyone who dared bend a regulation by even a fraction. And yet, here she was, brazenly parked on someone else's property, violating every principle she had spent years enforcing. Ben felt his stomach twist as a surge of anger bubbled up inside him. It wasn't just the inconvenience, it was the audacity, the sheer lack of respect. How could someone so public, so seemingly conscientious about rules, act with such blatant disregard when it suited them? It felt like a personal violation, a silent statement that his hard work meant nothing in the face of entitlement. He took a cautious step toward the SUV, his eyes narrowing. Karen was scrolling through her phone, completely absorbed, seemingly oblivious to the destruction her presence represented. Each row of grass she had interrupted, every patch of earth crushed under the weight of her tires, made Ben's pulse quicken. He imagined all the hours he had spent tending to this land, moments when the world outside felt far away, now reduced to a small disaster zone by someone else's whim. Ben's hands clenched instinctively at his sides. He could feel the blood rushing through his temples, the frustration making his thoughts sharper, more urgent. There was a raw, burning intensity in the injustice of it all, the sense that someone had crossed an invisible line, trampling not just his field, but his patience, his pride, his peace of mind. He could see neighbors walking by, eyes widening in silent acknowledgement, but no one stepped forward. It was a private battle in a public space, and he realized he was on his own. His mind raced, thinking through the possibilities. Confrontation seemed tempting but volatile. He knew Karen's reputation for escalating situations. Legal avenues might work eventually, but that would take weeks, possibly months. While his field remained desecrated, the anger settled in deeper, sharpening into resolve, forcing him to consider actions he had never needed to imagine before. And yet, underneath it all, there was an odd clarity. This wasn't just about a vehicle or a broken rule. It was about respect. It was about boundaries. And it was about standing firm, even when the world, or at least one particularly obstinate neighbor, seemed determined to ignore them. Ben inhaled slowly, forcing himself to focus, to channel the fury into thought, into planning, into something purposeful. As he stared at the red SUV gleaming arrogantly in the fading light, he realized one thing. This wasn't going to be just another bad day. This was a challenge, and he would meet it. How? He didn't yet know. But Ben Harper had never been one to back down from what was rightfully his. The sun had long dipped below the horizon, leaving Ben Harper's field bathed in the muted glow of twilight. But the bright red SUV remained stubbornly in the center of his land, a glaring reminder of the day's injustice. The earlier surge of anger had not faded. It had transformed into a deeper, more persistent ache. Ben sat on the edge of his porch, phone in hand, dialing the HOA office for what felt like the 100th time. Each call met with vague apologies, redirected numbers, or messages that would get back to him soon. But soon had a way of stretching into eternity, and with every unanswered call, the weight of helplessness settled heavier on his shoulders. Not one to remain passive, Ben tried other means of communication. He scribbled polite yet firm notes and left them under windshield wipers, hoping that perhaps Karen or someone else might reconsider the blatant intrusion. He walked up and down the street, knocking on a few neighbors' doors, seeking advice, some sympathetic ears, or at least a shared outrage. But the whispers he received were a mix of pity and caution. "Maybe don't escalate it. She's the HOA president, you know." Phrases that only reinforced how powerless an ordinary person could feel when faced with someone who wielded authority with little accountability. Every time Ben walked past the SUV, the frustration knotted tight in his chest. It wasn't just the physical damage to the grass or the faint tire marks etched into the soil. It was what the act represented. His field, usually a sanctuary, had become an impromptu parking lot, a stage for Karen's whims and disregard. Each glance at the shiny, unapologetic vehicle reminded him of how vulnerable a single person could feel when confronting someone who operated under the illusion of unchecked power. The contrast between the hours he had devoted to tending his land and the casual disregard of someone else's selfish convenience made the injustice sting even more sharply. Neighbors passed quietly, some offering sympathetic glances, others merely shaking their heads. A few older residents had attempted to offer comforting words. "It's temporary, Ben. Don't let it get to you." But the assurances were hollow, unable to touch the raw tension that pulsed through him each time he glanced at the intruder. The field, which had once been a symbol of peace and self-reliance, had transformed into a battleground for patience and dignity, and every moment that Karen remained unchallenged added layers to his frustration. That night, as the crickets chirped and the faint glow of distant streetlights cast long shadows across the field, Ben couldn't escape the pain of helplessness. It was the ache of realizing that no law, no HOA regulation, no polite request could immediately protect an ordinary person from the audacity of someone who believed the rules applied to everyone else but themselves. He paced along the perimeter, imagining different scenarios. What if he confronted her? What if he waited it out? Each thought led only to another pang of tension as he recognized the limits of conventional solutions in the face of audacity wrapped in authority. Even in solitude, the frustration echoed. He thought about the countless weekends spent tending to this land, the hours of sweat and care invested in every square foot, and the ease with which it had been disrupted. The injustice wasn't just a minor inconvenience. It was a violation of trust, a subtle reminder of the imbalance that could exist when power and entitlement overshadow respect for others. As the evening stretched into night, Ben leaned against the fence, staring at the SUV's taillights reflecting faintly in the dim light. The pain was no longer just anger. It was the slow, gnawing ache of knowing that for now, he was powerless. And yet, amid that helplessness, a quiet determination began to stir. The sense of injustice had taken root deeply, and Ben knew that while tonight he felt trapped by circumstance, tomorrow might offer a path to reclaim not just his field, but his sense of fairness and dignity. Morning arrived with a soft golden glow spilling across Ben Harper's field, the light catching the dew on the grass and momentarily masking the remnants of yesterday's anger. The bright red SUV was still there, stubbornly stationary, a silent challenge that seemed to mock him. But today, Ben felt a flicker of something different. The ache of helplessness from yesterday still lingered, but underneath it, a spark of resolve had begun to grow. He remembered the old padlock and chain he had stashed in the shed months ago, a relic from a time when securing the gate had been simple necessity rather than a tool of strategy. And suddenly, a thought crystallized in his mind. If the law couldn't protect him, maybe he could create his own small measure of justice. He moved deliberately, almost cautiously, as if the grass itself might witness his plan. Ben retrieved the lock, testing the mechanism with practiced fingers, feeling a quiet thrill at the memory of past summer evenings spent maintaining his property. Closing the gate was a simple act, yet it carried the weight of defiance, a silent statement that his boundaries mattered and that audacity had consequences even for someone as bold as Karen Wilkinson. The padlock clicked shut, a small but profound sound that resonated louder in Ben's chest than any applause could. The first hour passed with almost unbearable tension. Ben sat on the porch, sipping lukewarm coffee, ears straining for the telltale sounds of frustration or movement. When he finally saw Karen at the wheel, her hands flying helplessly over the steering wheel, her face a mixture of confusion and indignation, Ben felt a strange, almost dizzying rush. It was not cruelty that animated his gaze, but the raw satisfaction of seeing balance restored. She had treated his field as if it were an open lot, yet now, even for a short while, she had become the one confined, waiting for a resolution beyond her control. Neighbors began to notice too, the soft murmur of curiosity and amusement drifting across fences and porches. Some waved discreetly, others whispered theories about what Ben might be planning. But he remained focused, watching the scene unfold with a steady pulse of anticipation. Each attempt Karen made to coax the vehicle out only strengthened his sense of quiet vindication. For Ben, this moment was not about revenge. It was about reclaiming dignity, asserting a boundary that had been ignored, and experiencing the rare, undeniable truth that courage and cleverness could tip the scales. As the hours stretched on, Ben felt something he hadn't realized he'd been missing. A sense of empowerment. Yesterday had been filled with frustration and helplessness. Today, even with the gate closed, he had agency. Each glance at the SUV, each frustrated sigh escaping Karen as she realized she was temporarily trapped, reinforced a simple truth. Sometimes the simplest actions, executed with patience and thought, could bring a measure of justice that the formal world could not. Ben's satisfaction wasn't fleeting. It grew quietly, like the steady rise of the sun over his field. There was a lesson here that extended beyond his immediate victory. It was a reminder that the small acts, the decisions made with intention, could carry meaning far beyond the moment. Watching Karen fumble and gesticulate in vain, Ben began to understand that injustice, no matter how brazen, could meet a subtle counterforce, a clever act rooted in principle rather than anger. By late afternoon, the field was bathed in warm amber light, the shadows lengthening across the tire tracks left in the grass. Ben felt a calm satisfaction settle over him, a feeling that balanced triumph with humility. He hadn't shouted or scolded. He had not broken any laws, yet the field was once again, in a quiet but unmistakable way, his. The injustice of yesterday had not disappeared entirely, but for now, it had been addressed. And within that resolution, Ben found more than relief. He discovered a renewed confidence, a sense that even ordinary people could correct the course of events when they acted with clarity and patience. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, Ben leaned against the fence, feeling the steady rhythm of his own heartbeat. For the first time in 2 days, he allowed himself to believe that the world wasn't entirely ruled by entitlement, that sometimes fairness could be restored not by law or complaint, but by clever, thoughtful action. In that quiet triumph, hope had taken root, a gentle but undeniable promise that tomorrow might be brighter, not just for him, but for anyone who believed in the rightness of standing up for oneself. By late Sunday afternoon, the sun had begun its slow descent, painting the sky with hues of amber and soft pinks that danced across Ben Harper's field. The bright red SUV remained stubbornly in place, a gleaming monument to yesterday's audacity and today's quiet justice. Karen Wilkinson, the indomitable HOA president, had been pacing and gesturing with growing desperation, phone pressed to her ear, trying to orchestrate some sort of escape, but the reality was simple. She had underestimated Ben, and the rules of his little domain had proved more formidable than her usual authority. Ben had spent the morning tending to his chores with a calm, steady focus, observing from the porch as Karen made futile calls and waved at neighbors in search of help. He noticed the subtle shift in the atmosphere. The neighbors who had been mere observers yesterday were now quietly sharing smiles and whispered jokes about the all-powerful Karen's predicament. No one laughed cruelly. Instead, there was a collective sense of satisfaction, a shared recognition that sometimes the smallest, most thoughtful acts could outshine bluster and arrogance. Finally, around mid-afternoon, Karen managed to reach Mrs. Larkin, the neighbor from 2 houses down, who gently pointed out the obvious. The gate was locked. For a moment, Karen froze, her hand lingering over the phone as the realization hit. Her usual confidence faltered, replaced by a flush of embarrassment that even the strongest HOA titles could not shield her from. She had prided herself on authority, on being untouchable in her domain, but here in Ben's world, her control had evaporated. Ben walked toward the gate at a measured pace, his heart calm but alert, knowing this moment had been building for 2 long days. Karen's gaze flicked up at him, a mixture of indignation and reluctant acknowledgement in her eyes. He stopped a few feet away, resting a hand lightly on the gate, as if to underline the simple truth of the situation. "I hope you understand now," he said, his voice steady and measured, carrying the weight of quiet authority, "that someone else's property isn't a place for your whims." The words were neither harsh nor vindictive, but they carried a resonance far stronger than any scolding. They spoke of boundaries, of respect, and of the power that ordinary people possess when they act with courage and clarity. Karen lowered her gaze, muttering something that was more acknowledgement than excuse, as Ben's neighbors emerged from behind fences and porches, applauding the simple but undeniable victory. What struck Ben most profoundly wasn't the vindication or even the small thrill of seeing Karen humbled. It was the reaction of those around him, neighbors who had often felt powerless in the face of bureaucracy and officiousness, now looked at him with quiet admiration. They had witnessed something rare, a display of assertive, clever action that didn't rely on confrontation, legal threats, or aggression, but on a thoughtful assertion of one's rights. Ben's calm decisiveness had become a living lesson in courage, showing that even the most confident and seemingly untouchable figures could be held accountable when someone acted with principle. As Karen finally managed to free her vehicle and drive away, the field returned to its natural quiet, the tire tracks fading into the soft earth. Ben stayed a moment longer, surveying his land with satisfaction, but also with a sense of humility. The victory wasn't just his. It belonged to every person who had ever felt powerless, every neighbor who had witnessed the quiet triumph of right over arrogance. By evening, as the last rays of sunlight spilled across the field, Ben realized that his actions had ripples beyond the immediate event. There was inspiration here, in the way ordinary people could reclaim their space, assert their dignity, and demonstrate that respect and patience often carried greater weight than force. His triumph was complete not because he had humiliated anyone, but because he had restored justice and, in doing so, reminded his community that courage need not be loud to be powerful. The neighbors left with smiles, perhaps a little more confident in their own ability to stand up for themselves. Karen, humbled but wiser, drove away, her SUV a symbol of what happens when arrogance meets careful resolve. And Ben, standing alone in the fading light, felt a warm certainty settle over him. Even ordinary acts of courage could spark inspiration. And justice, when administered with thought and care, could transform a community as quietly as the setting sun transformed his field.